Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Currently Speaking, the podcast of the Current Consulting Group. I'm Bill Current, president and founder of the Current Consulting Group, and I'm joined today by Brian Feely, vice president of the Current Consulting Group. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Bill.
And this is another installment in our series on oral fluid testing. Today, we're going to talk about the benefits of oral fluid testing and when it's maybe not a good match for your workplace. So, Brian, let's launch into what would you say are maybe the top 5 benefits of oral fluid drug testing?
Sure. Well, so let's start out with really the ease of collection of the sample. So I've always I've been involved with oral fluid testing and applications now for over getting close to 30 years, I fear saying. But so the ease of use of the product, being able to do it pretty much anytime, anywhere, is key, and not having to deal with bathrooms and the hassles associated with bathrooms and collection sites. And so I think it's that ease of use, which is really one of the top ones that people like about oral fluid. I think another one is really that oral fluid detects very recent use. So you're looking at something that is within minutes of someone ingesting or smoking or using a drug, out to about maybe a day. And sometimes that can be a little longer with some of the lab-based oral fluid tests, and point of cares can be a little shorter. But really, you're talking about what somebody has in their system now. So very recent use. What did they do before they came into work? What did they do perhaps in the late hours? If they were up late partying or at a concert or whatever they might have done, you're going to pick that up right away in the morning. Certainly if someone goes out to lunch and they come back smelling or looking high, you test with oral fluid, you're going to find that recent use. So that's really a key one. I think the other thing that has really turned people onto oral fluid testing, especially if you've had experience with urine and the many ways there are to beat a urine drug screen, is the fact that oral fluid is really difficult to subvert. Every collection is 100% observed. So you have a donor and you have a person administering the test or observing that collection. And so they're all 100% observed. It's really difficult for someone to beat an oral fluid test. So that's really key. And the other thing I think is, it makes it really quite convenient when you think about that ease of use. It makes it convenient for remote collections, for difficult collection scenarios. It could be a third shift. It could be a weekend. It could be a time when the collection site, even during a regular day or evening when you would hope a collection site might be open, but they're closed. So that logistic benefit of oral fluid and its ability to be collected anytime, anywhere. And I think overall, there's also a benefit of oral fluid when you look at the cost factors associated with someone going away from work, being time away from work, maybe even a supervisor that went with someone to do a drug test. When you look at those indirect costs and you look at the cost for the oral fluid device and the lab-based test or the rapid test, you can often find that there's a substantial savings that can be realized by oral fluid. So those would be my top 5. There's some others, Bill, that we could talk about. The one I'll mention that ties into the recent use aspect, because it's so prevalent today as we see. We just turned into the new year here. It's January of 2024. So the Washington and California laws come into play, right? So those laws are now requiring, essentially, by the way they've termed and written the laws, you really can't do urine drug screening anymore or hair screening if you're going to take action or discriminate against a person in the workplace. California, I think it's both applicants and current employees, and in the state of Washington, it's for applicant testing. You really have to use a method that is based on the psychoactive form of THC. So it's about marijuana, and it's about testing for parent THC or psychoactive form. The urine screen tests for the non-psychoactive form or the metabolite. So another benefit of oral fluid is that it's testing for the parent THC, which again is going to become very important as the people in those states realize the laws have changed and they need to become compliant. Oral fluid is going to be a great solution for them.
So you mentioned collections and the ease of collection, the fact that the donor and the collector are always within sight of one another. And one trend that's sort of picking up some momentum in our industry are virtual collections. It would seem to me that, and this is where the donor is in one location and the collector or observer is in another location, and they're video observing the collection process taking place, proctor testing, if you
Yep.
will. It seems like oral fluid testing would be a perfect match for that type of a drug test method.
Well, it really is. I mean, if you think about it, it's probably the only thing that makes sense in a virtual or proctored setting. And so your urine collection obviously is at least not an observed one is going to be possible, and you wouldn't want to do that anyway. Who knows what's going on in the bathroom? So yeah, an oral fluid is perfect for virtual type collection. There are some of these that are already out there and on the market. I think that they were sort of coming into their own pre-COVID, but as COVID hit, I think we all found that virtual doctors visits became a reality. Even doing certain tests and running things for your with a doctor observing you on screen came about. And during that time, I think some of the developers of the drug tests that are now available proctored formats did a lot of great work to make sure that the products were kitted up and they were shipped overnight, and as soon as you get the box, you really can't open it and start fiddling with it until you get on screen with a trained certified person that's going to observe that process. And you open it up in front of them on the screen, and you do everything is done with in front of that proctored that person that's helping to proctor the test. So it's really gotten buttoned up. Sure, there will be challenges. There's some things ahead for that are going to have to be overcome, just like every other method and types of tests that have hit our markets over the years. But yeah, it's a good solution. Oral fluid fits well with that bill, and I predict we're only going to see more and more of that.
Yeah, and I'll put a little plug in for an episode of Currently Speaking that we have coming up with Doug Meiser from eMed Screen,
Yeah.
where he's going to be talking about proctor testing. So, to our audience, be looking for that on our website and through social media. I think you'll find it very interesting. Now, with oral fluid testing, you talked about some of the benefits of oral fluid testing with the test itself. What about its impact on the workplace, like safety, for example?
Right. Yeah. So, if you think about the different benefits that we went through, being able to do it anytime, anywhere, the ease of the collection process, getting tests done where you might not otherwise be able to get them done. So more testing and more compliance with a program means that you're covering more of your workforce. You're not hesitating to conduct the drug test because I couldn't find a collection site, and I know so and so's random test came up, and but we'll skip it for now. And I'm referring to non-regulated testing, of course, or other scenarios where someone might suspect something, but it's a hassle to get this person tested. I got to drag them to a collection site. So overall, the ease of use factor makes you, I believe, conduct more readily, and you're going to be more likely to do a test where some cases you might not. That leads to greater safety, right? Because the more people you're testing, the more compliant your program is, the better your program is overall. That recent use aspect, you're picking up people that are at the biggest risk in your workplace. So these are the ones that can contribute to accidents or incidents occurring. Being able to identify that recent use ties very nicely with workplace safety. And a big one, Bill, is the inability to subvert or substitute or adulterate your sample. Right. So we know from many years of urine screening and looking on the website, looking on the internet, you can find literally hundreds of thousands of products and methods out there to beat your urine drug screen. And so every time someone uses one of those products and slips through and is really a user, but slipped through and beat their urine drug screen, they represent a risk in the workplace. So the fact that it's harder to subvert, very difficult to adulterate or substitute your oral fluid, makes it a more compliant, greater greater opportunity for catching people that are truly positive. And if you look at the positive rates that are present then Quest Diagnostics has published their index now for many years, you can see the positive rates for oral fluid typically are a little higher than they are for urine drug screening. One of the reasons we believe that's true is because it's more difficult to beat and more difficult to subvert. So, you also put that together with some of the logistic issues we talked about, testing in remote locations and more difficult collection scenarios. Again, greater compliance. You're going to do more tests. You're going to create a safer work environment.
So now, for our audience's benefit, Brian was with OraSure Technologies for over 25 years. He's seen it all when it comes to oral fluid testing. And maybe you can share from all of that experience what you would consider to be the ideal workplace scenario for oral fluid testing and where it's maybe not such a great fit.
Yeah, sure. So, we saw a lot of people adopt it for their programs across the board, right? For pre-employment and for post-accident, randoms, et cetera, et cetera. A really good fit for a recent use test like this, surely is in the area of reasonable suspicion, post-incident or post-accident. And I think that because you're really looking to identify something that happened recently, very recently in the workplace setting. But as people have, tested it out and used it for those applications, we saw many people adopting it and rolling it out for their entire program. Because it's, again, the ease of use component of it, wanting to stay consistent across their program. And Probably the one that would be a little bit outside of the use case would be if you are really an employer who's looking at lifestyle and you really are looking at long-term use and you care about what someone did weeks or months ago, then the oral fluid is probably not a good choice. In fact, it is not a good choice because you're really looking at hours to days, whereas with urine you're looking at weeks, and with hair testing you're looking at months. So if you really want that lifestyle. And we see that sometimes in financial institutions. Certain casinos are really like that hair test because they're looking at lifestyle and long-term indicators. Oral fluid wouldn't necessarily be a good fit there.
And so you brought up California and Washington. And before I let you go on from this episode of Currently Speaking, I just want to point out that there are sort of conflicting views on this, but there's a phrase that's used in both laws, in the Washington law for sure. I think it's in the California law as well, where it refers to scientifically, let's see if I can get it here, scientifically valid drug screening conducted through methods that do not screen for non-psychoactive cannabis metabolites being acceptable. And so, generally speaking, oral fluid testing would be such a drug testing method, but not all oral fluid tests just detect the parent drug, right? Some of them would also detect the metabolite, or what California and Washington refer to as the non-psychoactive metabolite. So how can an employer know that they're using a method that is detecting the parent drug or parent THC?
Well, so I think that going back to the discussion, one of the prior podcasts, we talked about the package insert, right? And in that package insert, it lists what the calibrator is, for example, what the test is really detecting. And in oral fluid, and almost all of them, the rapid tests and the lab-based tests, as far as that I know today, they're all going after the parent THC. So the antibodies that are used in those tests are raised and are implemented in these test kits to pick up the parent THC, the psychoactive form of the drug. And so, right off the bat, that if that test is testing for parent drug, that's the primary focus of the test. Oral fluid itself, the nature of oral fluid is that parent drug comes from the bloodstream into the oral fluid. So you have primarily parent drug in the oral fluid sample to begin with. If you test it for metabolite, you're really not going to find it in oral fluid, at least not with most of the tests that are on the market. And so, there's rare exceptions. I would say years ago, when some of the instant tests first hit the market, we saw manufacturers trying to basically use their rapid urine screens for oral fluid. And those urine screens of course, go after the carboxylic acid form of THC. That's the primary metabolite, if you will, of THC. If you tried to use that in an oral fluid test, and if you really are just looking for negatives and you don't want to find any positives, then go use the metabolite antibody in that, because you're never going to find a positive. But I think the other thing is that when you're looking at any screen that comes up positive with an oral fluid test for THC, you're going to send that to a laboratory for confirmation testing, and that laboratory is going to be confirming for parent THC. So you're going to get a report that says, Delta 9 THC. And so you have that 100% accurate backup from the lab saying that a sample screened and confirmed positive for parent THC. So those are the ways you have to look for it.
So it's interesting. Last year, the U.S. Department of Transportation, DOT, put out its final regulations for lab-based oral fluid testing. We're still waiting for laboratories to get certified to do oral fluid testing under the SAMHSA guidelines. But it just seems like 2024 is sort of the year of oral fluid testing, with the California and Washington laws, with the DOT regulations making their way toward being usable, et cetera. It just seems like a sort of a perfect storm in terms of the benefits of oral fluid testing that you articulated at the beginning of today's podcast, with sort of the trends that are going on now. It just seems like it's all coming together at the right time in terms of the potential for oral fluid testing.
Yeah, no, I think that you're absolutely right, Bill. I think if you're in the field and you're a provider, this is a great time for you to be able to expand your offering if you haven't adopted oral fluid yet. And I know in some of our surveys, we're showing a greatly increased number of providers who are saying they're offering it now or going to offer it in the future. And, there's good reason for doing that, and great momentum. And you're right, it's kind of a turning point in the adoption of oral fluid for drug testing.
Yeah, in our last 5 years of industry surveys, and many people on this podcast will know that the Current Consulting Group does an annual survey of the industry. We've been doing it for 25 years. We present it at the NDASA conference each year. We release the results. And between 2019 and 2023, the percentage of drug testing providers who say they now offer oral fluid testing increased from 39% to 86% in less than 5 years. So that's an indicator that a lot of people in the industry are buying into it. And I think that's a result of market demand, companies looking for more economical, more efficient ways to get a drug test done. And oral fluid testing seems to be a good match for that. So with that, we'll conclude today's episode of Currently Speaking. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, the information's right here on the screen. You can contact Brian directly with any questions about oral fluid testing, or visit our website at currentconsultinggroup.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. And with that, thank you for joining us. And that concludes today's episode of Currently Speaking.